Well, Egypt is suffering with soaring inflation, and right now the country's president is in Washington to make sure the aid keeps coming from the United States. Now, President Trump has praised him for doing a fantastic job in difficult circumstances, but many Egyptians, we found, do not agree.
Egypt's inflation rate is at its highest level in 30 years. Food prices have risen more than 40% in the last year, and it's Egypt's poor who are suffering the most.
One day we eat and one day we don't. Everybody is sick of it. I wish they would feed us. Fine, we don't want work or salaries, but they need to feed us. We can't even afford plain bread.
Since an uprising in 2011, Egypt's economy has been struggling, forcing the government to seek a $12 billion loan from the International Monetary Fund. In order to get the loan last year, it had to implement a series of painful economic measures like floating its currency and raising fuel prices. Since November, the Egyptian pound has lost more than 50% of its value against the dollar.
What do we eat? We just eat potatoes and rice. We don't buy meat or chicken. We haven't bought chicken since it's gotten very expensive.
Around 70 million Egyptians use the country's subsidy card program to buy their basic food requirements. The card entitles people to items worth up to 21 Egyptian pounds. That's less than $2 a month. 1 kilogram of sugar currently costs 45 cents, and a kilo of rice is 36 cents. If citizens buy a bottle of cooking oil, which is 66 cents, the total would reach $1.47, meaning they will still have to pay an extra 30 cents. And prices of imports are rising as domestic production falls.
Our production deficit keeps increasing because our production is not sufficient to feed the demand, putting into consideration the population increase too, and the size of farmland that's stable or even shrinking as a result of the dredging of farmland because of those who aren't protecting agriculture and aren't working on the reclamation and expansion of farmland.
The government says it's expecting inflation to ease by the end of the year and the currency to get stronger. But will Egyptians be able to hold their anger until then? Ben said, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, we are joined by John Salevurakis. He's an associate professor of economics at the American University in Cairo. John, thank you so much for joining us on Money Talks this evening in Cairo. Let's talk about inflation in a very succinct fashion. Just explain to us why it's so rampant.
It's rampant simply because of the devaluation that took place, thus making imported goods dramatically more expensive, which would thus cause people to substitute for domestically produced goods, thereby increasing those prices as well.
Okay, now the devaluation came about, was it as a result of the IMF's conditions on the loan that they had to allow the pound to float?
Of course, but it was also a function of the black market that had been springing up for several months, sending a clear indicator that the official rate of 880 or roughly that at the time was not a sustainable state of affairs.
Okay, now on the plus side, the rampant inflation and the weakening of the currency has meant that domestic people who work domestically and can now compete with India and Vietnam, apparently. And we're also seeing exports rising and imports declining, so the trade deficit is narrowing. Is that correct?
Certainly a greater demand for domestically produced goods. Again, as I said, as people substitute away from the imported goods.
Look, we're hearing that Sisi is tackling the economy and reforming the economy in a way that is painful, reducing fuel subsidies, food subsidies, but that is in fact necessary. What's your take on that?
I think in the long term it is a necessary state of affairs. Whether or not it's a politically or socially sustainable course of action at a time when conditions are already rather difficult is a separate issue.
Well, that was a question posed in that report. Is there any sense that inflation and other factors are going to push people beyond just, complaining?
Well, we've been here before.
Yes.
In the era before the financial crisis, 2006 to 2008, we saw inflation go above 22% in Egypt, and that didn't end particularly well for Egypt generally by the time we got around to 2010, 2011.
Do you think that it continues to be in the United States' interest to keep working and keep paying, essentially, Egypt?
Certainly it does. I mean, certainly I would guess the American president sees things that way. It would seem to me that the very last thing the West or the U.S. specifically needs in this part of the world is one more unfriendly government or a friendly government that's unable to insulate itself from domestic strife.
Do you think there's any chance that Sisi will get more from Donald Trump?
Oh, absolutely. No question.
In what sort of quantities?
Oh, I mean, no, I don't think more than the current number, but I think the current number is certainly forthcoming.
Okay, John Salevurakis, thank you so much for joining us this evening from Cairo.